17 saw Napoleon at 2 o'clock. He was in extremely good humor and very facetious, cracking jokes upon various subjects, and rallying me about a young lady in the island. Told me that when he was at Bologna, 2 English sailors arrived there who made their escape from Verdun and had passed through the country and discovered they had remained there for some time. Having no money, they were at a loss how to effect their escape, and there was a vigilant watch kept upon the boats. That they despaired of being able to seize upon one, they made a sort of vessel of little ribs of wood, which they formed with their knives, living as well as they could upon roots and fruits. This bark of theirs they covered with calico, which they stretched over the ribs. When finished, it was not more than about 3.5 feet in length, out of a proportionate breadth, and so light that one of them carried it on his shoulders. In this machine they determined to attempt their passage to England. Seeing an English frigate approach very near the shore, they launched their bark and attempted to join her. But before they had proceeded very far, they were discovered by the douaniers, seized, and brought back. The story got wind in consequence of the astonishment excited at seeing 2 men venture out to sea in such a fragile conveyance. I heard of it and ordered them with their little ship to be brought before me. I was myself struck with astonishment at the idea of men trusting their lives to such an article, and asked if it was possible they could have intended to have gone to sea in that. They replied that to convince me of it, they were ready that moment to attempt it again in the same vessel. Admiring the boldness of the attempt and the bluntness of the reply, I ordered that they should be set at liberty, some Napoleons given to them, and a conveyance to the English squadron provided for them. Previous to this, they were going to be tried as spies, for several persons had seen them lurking about the camp for some days. When I made my triumphal entry into Berlin, said Napoleon, the mother of the Prince of Orange, the sister of the king, was left behind sick in the upper apartments of the palace and very badly off, having been abandoned without money and neglected by almost everybody. A day or 2 after my arrival there, some of her attendants came to ask for assistance, as they had not wherewithal to procure even fuel for her use. The king indeed had neglected her most shamefully. The moment it was made known to me, I ordered 100,000 francs to be instantly sent, and went to see her myself afterwards. I caused her to be furnished with everything befitting her rank, and we had frequent interviews together. She was much obliged to me, and a kind of friendship commenced between us. I liked her conversation. When her son, the Prince of Orange, was aide-de-camp to Wellington, he went over from Spain or Portugal to London at the time that the intended marriage between the Princess Charlotte and him was in contemplation. From London, he wrote several letters to his mother, giving a description of the whole of the royal family, beginning with the Queen and going through every branch nominatively, filled with errors and sottises, particularly of the blank, against whom he appeared to be particularly indignant. He did not even spare blank, whom he painted as ambitious and desirous of command, and that he should be a mere cipher and a stallion if blank, to which he declared he would never submit. There were many fine and heroic sentiments expressed in them, which, though in a romantic style, did the writer honor, but he tore the whole blank to pieces. Those letters he sent by an agent to Hamburg for the purpose of being forwarded to his mother. This agent was arrested, his papers seized, and dispatched to Paris, where they were examined and laid before me. I read them in a cursory manner and laughed very heartily at their contents. Afterwards, in order to retaliate a little for all the abuse heaped upon me, I ordered them to be sent to the Moniteur and published. Meanwhile, however, the agent, acquainted with the prince's brother, with his arrest and the seizure of his papers, with the contents of which he was partly acquainted, before the publication was completed, I received a letter from her, conjuring me not to make the public, stating to me what injury it would do to her son and her family, and calling to my recollection the time I had been at Berlin. I was touched with her letter and countermanded the publishing of the letters, which would have made great noise in Europe and have been extremely disagreeable to the persons described in them. Napoleon spoke of the late Queen of Prussia in very high terms, said that he had an esteem for her, and that if the king had brought her at first to Tilsit, it would in all probability have procured him better terms. She was elegant, ingenuous, extremely well informed, continued Napoleon. She bitterly lamented the war. Ah, said she to me, la mémoire du grand Frédéric nous a fait égarer. Nous nous crûmes pareils à lui et nous le sommes pas. Oh, we remember Frederick, and we thought we would like him, but we're not as good as him. I observed to the emperor that his enemies had accused him of having treated her very barbarously. What? Said he. Did they say that I poisoned her too? I replied no, but that they asserted that he had been the means of her death in consequence of the misfortunes he had caused to befall her country. Why, replied Napoleon, that grief for the fallen situation of her husband and her country and for the losses they had sustained and the humiliated state they were reduced to may have accelerated her death. It's very probable. But that was not my fault. Why did her husband declare war against me? However, instead of treating her barbarously, nobody could have paid her more attention or respect or have esteemed her more, for which I received her thanks. The Princess of Sam was extremely beautiful and witty, but in point of virtue and other good qualities, she was far below her sister. She would make a charming mistress, but not a blank. She had blank. Napoleon then made some observations about Malta, an abode with which he declared he would be satisfied for some years, professing at the same time his disbelief of such being the intentions of the governments. He added that the best thing our government could do would be to make a kind of treaty with him, by which he would bind himself not to quit Malta for a certain number of years without the permission of the Prince Regent, with the condition that at the expiration of the time he should be received in England. This would save the nation 6 or 8 millions of francs yearly. It would, added he, have been much more honorable for England, and indeed for the coalesced powers, and more humane, to have caused me to be shot on board the Bellerophon in the rage of the moment, than to have condemned me to be exiled to such a rock as this. They might have excused themselves by saying, "It is necessary for the tranquility of Europe to put this man out of the way." This would have at once freed them from all alarm and saved millions to their treasury, besides being much more humane. When the discussions about the sentence on Louis XVI took place, Condorcet declared that his conscience would not allow him to vote for death, but in place of that, he voted that the unfortunate Louis should be condemned to the galleys for life. This proposal met with universal disapprobation, even from the most violent of the Jacobins, and great odium was thrown upon Condorcet for having voted for that, which, in the opinion of all, was worse than death. Now, exile here, particularly under the man they have chosen, is infinitely worse than condemnation to the galleys, for there you have the son of Europe, and if you have money, you can enjoy comparatively a tolerable existence. I recollect it too long, I think he said, a colonel who had been condemned to the galleys for life. He was certainly confined, but he never was obliged to work and had everything allowed him at his own expense, which could render his situation supportable. The keeper, unless he was like this governor, would never degrade a man who had held such a situation by obliging him to labor. Besides, for money, a man can always get somebody to work for him. I therefore maintain that it would have been more honorable, more consistent with policy, and above all, more humane to have caused me to be quietly shot on board of Bellerophon. It would have been preferred by myself. I really think that Lord Blake imagined that by a series of ill treatment and humiliation they would induce me to commit suicide, and for that purpose found your man. The very idea of this, if I ever had any thoughts of doing so, would effectually prevent my putting it into execution. 22nd. Saw Napoleon at 12 o'clock. He has continued to rise at 4 o'clock in the morning and to employ his time in reading and writing. Pointed out to me that he had been obliged to cause his coat to be turned, as there was no green cloth on the island except of what the French call couleur de mer de roi. Spoke about his detention in so horrible an abode. Il y avait quelque chose de sauvage, something savage about it. The blank did not know how to separate the man from the situation. As for his consul, as emperor, being at war with England, I did her as much harm as I could. But Is Napoleon Bonaparte now when all the world is at peace? What right have they to detain me as a prisoner? It is a great nation going to war with one man. I have, continued he, reflected upon my conduct towards the English and have nothing to reproach myself with except not having done enough against them as an enemy. I ought to have put their prisoners in pontoons, not to punish the poor prisoners, as it was not their fault, but to force your oligarchy to remove the French from those in which they had immured them. He then observed that the eyes of the English would soon be opened with respect to his character. They will see, said he, the folly and injustice of keeping me in this island, an island so bad that I can compare it to nothing else than the face of the wretch they have sent out as a governor. This and the enormous expense will cause my removal. I observed that I was afraid the present disturbed state of England would operate most powerfully against his being permitted to go to England. There, replied he, your minister's not silly enough to believe that I would lose my character so far as to put myself at the head of canaille, even if the latter were willing to place a foreigner at their head, which is very unlikely. Even in France, I refuse to do it. I have too great a regard for the reputation I shall leave to posterity to act the adventurer. No, it is hatred and the fear they have of the information I could give. They are afraid I should say it was not true, in reply to the histories of many political events, which they have explained in their own way. What do you think, said he, of all the things in the world would give me the greatest pleasure? I was on the point of replying removal from St. Helena, and when he said to be able to go about incognito in London and other parts of England to the restaurateurs with a friend, to dine in public at the expense of half a guinea or a guinea, and listen to the conversation of the company, to go through them all, changing almost daily, and in this manner with my own ears, to hear the people express their sentiments in their unguarded moments freely and without restraint, to hear the real opinion of myself and of the surprising occurrences of the last 20 years. I observed that he would hear much evil and much good of himself. Oh, as to the evil, replied he, I care not about that. I'm well used to it. Besides, I know that the public opinion will be changed. The nation will be just as much disgusted at the libels published against me as they formerly were greedy in reading and believing them. This, added he, and the education of my son would form my greatest pleasure. It was my intention to have done this had I reached America. Happiest days of my life were from 16 to 20 during the semesters when I used to go about, as I have told you. I should wish to do so for one restaurateur to another, living moderately and having a lodging for which I paid 3 louis a month. They were the happiest days of my life. I was always so much occupied that I may say I never was truly happy upon the throne. Not that I have to reproach myself with doing evil whilst seated there. On the contrary, I restored 50,000 families to their country, and the improvements I made in France will speak for themselves. I made war, certainly, of this there is no doubt, but in almost every instance I was either forced to it or had some great political object in view. Had I died at Moscow, continued he, I should have left behind me a reputation as a conqueror without a parallel in history. A bullet ought to have put an end to me there. Whereas, when a man like me dies in misfortune, his reputation is lessened. Then I had never received a check. No doubt afterwards, at Lutzen and Bautzen, with an army of recruits and without cavalry, I reestablished my reputation, and the campaign of 1814, with such an inferior force, did not lessen it. I observed that the generality of the world was surprised that he had not made a peace at Châtillon when circumstances were apparently desperate for him. Napoleon replied, I could not consent to render the empire less than what it was when I mounted the throne. I had sworn to preserve it. Moreover, the allied powers each day brought forth some condition more inadmissible than on the previous one. You may think it strange, but I assure you that I would not sign it now. Had I remained on the throne after the return of Elba, I would have kept it because I found it made, but I would not have made it myself originally. My great fault was in not having made peace.